Hi, this is Corey Franklin with Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a significant effect on our culture, our history, or our society. And tonight we're going to start out with Robert Galvin. And a couple of weeks ago, about 4 weeks ago, we did Steve Jobs from Apple. Tonight we're going to do Robert Galvin from Motorola. And in many respects, Robert Galvin was as much of a technical innovator, a genius, and a visionary as Steve Jobs. The difference is that Steve Jobs died at 56 while he was still the head of his company and still innovating products. And Robert Galvin died at 89, and he was out of Motorola for 20 years. But for the period from 1940 through the mid-1980s, it could be argued that Robert Galvin did as much as Steve Jobs to change the way Americans live through technology. Robert Galvin was a nice Catholic boy born in Marshfield, Wisconsin, and his family moved down to Chicago. His father started Motorola, and it was started primarily with a new idea in the 30s, and that was to put radios in cars. Before that, they didn't have radios in cars. Motorola did that, and that's how they got their name, motor for car and Ola for sound from Victrola. In 1940, Bob Galvin joined Motorola formally, and he came up with some of the most brilliant ideas in technology of the 20th century. He came up with a lot of the two-way communication devices, which were instrumental in World War II, walkie-talkies and things like that. He came up with a lot of design in television, some color television design, some portable television design, LCD technology, and of course cellular communication. He instituted the first cell phone. Motorola actually had the first workable cell phone. It was a big, bulky thing, but it was the prototype for everything that came after that. For over 40 years, Bob Galvin was responsible for some of the most important communications devices and technology in the United States and in the world. When Neil Armstrong communicated from the moon, it was through Motorola technology. Here is a report from Motorola on Bob Galvin. And the thing I want you to pay the most attention to is the story of how he got cell phone approval, showing the cell phone first to George Herbert Walker Bush when he was vice president, who then showed it to Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan asked him if the product was on the market. He said, "No, your FCC won't allow me to do that." And Ronald Reagan got some functionary at the FCC to approve it in 30 days.
Bob Galvin has Motorola in his blood. Learning early from his dad, Paul. At 16, he was working on the plant floor.
We were all very much of a factory family.
Growing up with Motorola, he became part of the creative fabric that from the early 30s gave Americans sound in their homes and cars.
For radio, straightforward radio, car radio, home radio.
Motorola provided critical mobile communications for police. In World War II, it was radio for GIs with the handy-talkie. Post-war, the company joined the new visual revolution.
Next sophisticated thing was television.
The Norwich Pharmaco Company, famous for fine drug products, makers of hospital-tested Pepto-Bismol, presents...
Motorola always was ahead of the technological curve. And the driving force was always Bob Galvin.
Bob Galvin was a real hero for American communications. He probably single-handedly drove the U.S. into the cellular telephone business and helped create a very competitive, very innovative spirit in cellular communications.
It was not just his vision with regard to the technology, the marketplace. The fact is, when you worked for Bob Galvin, you never had to worry about how ethical or how moral something was. If it was right, you did it. If it was wrong, you didn't even consider it.
With that philosophy as the bedrock of Motorola, Galvin transformed American communications.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
There are two things that Motorola did under Bob Galvin that were crucial to the development of the industry that we know today.
A few of us had a yen for the concept of a cellular telephone.
What Motorola did was created a parallel system of mobile pre-cellular telephones in competition with AT&T. So when, in the 1970s, the FCC starts to consider whether to grant licenses and radio spectrum for cellular telephone, Motorola puts in a competing proposal to AT&T's, and it's not until 1981 that the FCC decides that there will be 2 licensees in every market, and this was unheard of.
And I would suggest that if Motorola had not taken AT&T on, which they did head-to-head, that we would have a very different world today.
The second thing that Motorola did to give us the cellular world we have today was to constantly push for miniaturization.
The introduction of the cell phone on the American market and beating out AT&T, says Galvin, happened almost by accident. It was during a visit to the White House with an impromptu demonstration for George Bush and Ronald Reagan.
He said, "Show that thing that you showed me to Ron." So he said, what is this? I said, "That is a portable telephone." And he says, "Is it on the market yet?" I said, "No, your FCC will not license us." And so he turned to his associate, a staff man. He said, "You call the chairman tomorrow morning and tell him I want this thing on the market in 30 days.
One of Galvin's legendary skills is the uncanny ability to unite warring sides.
And the thing that amazed me about Bob was his listening ability, his ability to not only take in information, but then to synthesize it into something that was acceptable to a group of people who normally couldn't agree on anything.
A key operation around which we all try to achieve cooperation, and that is trust.
Objectivity. Personality never entered into decisions. You did what was right for the company, what was right for society.
In the 70s, at a time when American technology was reeling from overseas competition, Galvin countered, aggressively entering foreign markets.
He also was an American hero in that he pioneered the idea of the semiconductor industry in the U.S. being competitive worldwide.
One of the areas that was very significant was his early understanding of the challenge that was represented by Japan.
Motorola took the AMP cellular system and the Dynatac and its successors to Japan and brought competition to the Japanese market.
The marketplace rode over all the objections.
Not only in Japan, but China as well, proving there he was a powerful negotiator.
He posed 3 questions to the Chinese government. First, would you like to have in China the #1 wireless telecommunications company in the world? 2, do you think that you can create that company? 3, if not, would you be willing to allow Motorola to be that company for China? And the leadership in China determined that they would allow Motorola to become that company.
My son and I.
Today, Bob Galvin remains humble and modest, but his vision and accomplishments speak volumes about the man who changed the way the world communicates.
I had a distinct privilege of encouraging the next why not.
So that's Robert Galvin. He turned over the reins of the company about 20 years ago. He left it in the stewardship first of his family and then of some outsiders. And Motorola has made a lot of wrong turns since then. They placed a heavy bet on iridium technology. They got in a fight with Steve Jobs. They've done a lot of things that have not advanced the company since Robert Galvin left. But his legacy for Motorola is one of the great business stories and one of the great technology stories of the 20th century. and we have him to thank a lot for the way we communicate today. As we turn from Bob Galvin, I want to make a brief mention of one of those coincidences, obituary coincidences, for baseball players that happened recently. Within 2 days, 2 baseball players died who were remarkable for the same thing. Matty Alou died, and Matty Alou was a good slap-hitting outfielder for the San Francisco Giants and the Pittsburgh Pirates. I saw him play a lot when I was working at Wrigley Field. And Matty Alou is famous for the fact that he and his brothers Felipe and Jesus played together for a little while and were the only brothers in history to play in the same outfield at the same time. And they also batted in the same inning. That's never happened before in Major League Baseball. They were all 3 good players, and Matty was a good slap hitter who led the league in hitting, and he also was in 2 World Series. Along with Matty Alou dying, Bob Forsch died, and Bob Forsch was a pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals. He actually threw out the first ball for the 7th game of the World Series last week, the 2011 World Series, and Bob Forsch is the 3rd winningest pitcher in St. Louis Cardinal history, but of note is the fact that he threw a no-hitter, and his brother, Ken Forsch, was also a pitcher in Major League Baseball, and he also threw a no-hitter in his career, making Bob Forsch and Ken Forsch the only brothers to throw no-hitters in Major League Baseball. So we have to report the death of Matty Alou of the famous Dominican Alou family, which included his brothers Felipe and Jesus, and his nephew Moises, and Bob Forsch, who along with his brother was one of the more formidable brother pitching combinations in Major League history. There's an old baseball joke. Someone once asked, what sibling combination won the most Major League games as pitchers? Was it the Deans? Was it the Maddoxes? Was it the Forsches? Was it somebody else? And the Wag answered, I think it was Cy Young and his sister. Cy Young won 511 games by himself. We're going to close tonight with Sid Melton, who was a great character actor on television and the movies in the 50s and 60s. And he's well known for some of his television appearances. He was a nice Jewish boy from Brooklyn, born Sidney Meltzer, and he's managed to star in a couple of low-grade B pictures in the late 40s and early 50s, including one called Lost Continent, which if you ever get a chance to see it, his pants fall off literally during the movie as he's climbing some rocks. It's a pretty funny scene. Hugh Beaumont is in there, and Hugh Beaumont starts cracking up when he sees Sid Melton's pants fall off. But he was best known for some of his television appearances. He starred as Captain Midnight's sidekick Ichabod Icky Mudd, which on television became Jet Jackson, flying commando in the late 50s. Here's a snippet of Sid Melton as Icky Mudd.
Here it is. Finished cut and ready to go.
Say, what is this gadget?
That, Icky, is an omni-counter.
Omni-counter? What does it do, count omnis?
Precisely.
What do you know? What's an omni?
Omni is a Latin word meaning all. We call this instrument an omni-counter because it can detect the presence of all minerals by counting the rate of radiation.
You mean it'll find things like gold?
Among other things.
Well, let's go out and find ourselves a gold mine.
That was Sid Melton's forte. He was generally a comic foil in those episodes. He was Charlie Halper, nightclub owner in the Make Room for Daddy series with Danny Thomas. Here's a brief snippet of him telling off Bobby Rydell in an episode with Danny Thomas.
Just hope you're not wasting your time here.
I don't think I follow you. How much I figure to make on you?
Oh, come on, Dad. Don't give me that big benefactor jazz. They pay big loot for these shows, and what do you figure? You'll hire cheap acts and keep most of the money for yourself?
Now, wait a minute, Bobby. That was uncalled for.
I'll say it. This is why you ungrateful young punk.
Wait a minute. Just take it easy, Charlie.
Yeah, Sid Melton always had Danny Thomas's back in that series. He was the guest star in one of the most touching episodes of the Dick Van Dyke Show ever. He played the guy with the coffee cart and the Danish cart who always came by every day to visit the office, and he developed a crush on Sally Rogers' Rosemarie, and he went to her apartment to profess his undying love for her in this winsome episode.
You write jokes, and I'm always doing jokes. I joke around so much, a lot of people, they can't tell when I'm serious.
I'm sure they can.
Can you?
How about that? I'm eating and I forgot the fish. I better feed them before I get back to the office.
You know, I just figured out what's wrong with you.
I'm witty and gorgeous. What could be wrong?
You never stumble.
Stumble?
Yeah, stumble. Like in all the Clark Gable movies, Claudia Colbert would stumble and hurt her ankle, and he would run over and she'd lean on him, and they'd look into each other's eyes, and without saying a word, they'd get married. I mean, all those big stars, Robert Taylor, Cary Grant, half of them wouldn't ever get a girl unless the girl stumbled. So, what chance has a guy like me got with a surefoot like you?
Look, Bert.
No kidding. I've been coming up to your office a long, long time, and I'm waiting and waiting. But you never stumble.
Guess I was born with strong ankles.
You want to know something else wrong with you?
What?
You overfeed the fish.
It won't hurt them.
That's a beautiful episode of Dick Van Dyke, and he does a wonderful job there. But Sid Melton's most famous television role, the role he'll forever be known for, is Alf Monroe, one of the Monroe brothers, on one of the great surrealistic comedies of the 1960s, Green Acres. He wasn't very good at his job, but then no one on Green Acres was very good at their jobs. And here in a Green Acres retrospective, he talks a little bit about it. For those of you who never saw it, the Monroe brothers were not brothers, they were a brother and sister, Alf and Ralph was his sister.
Mr. Douglas, I'm ready to go to work. Good. It may take me a few days longer than I planned. I'm no longer the Monroe brothers. I'm just plain Alf Monroe, solo carpenter.
Yes,
Me and Ralph had a fight, but I don't need her. I was always the brains of the outfit anyway.
If you were the brains, that explains how we get stuck with these crummy jobs.
What are you doing here in your bathroom?
I spent the night here.
Well, how brazen can you get?
That's right, it's Sid Melton, and here he is. When you'd walk in, the door would fall, and you always talked about fixing it, and you never did you?
I did a lot of fixing. I helped build this room. How do you like the floor?
Alf and Ralph were such a popular couple on the show. Why was your sister called Ralph? I never understood that.
Well, my feeling is that Mom wanted another boy, just boys. So when the gal came out, she called him Ralph.
And that
could have been Bruce, you know.
I see.
Roger, but Ralph.
One of the writers told me, said that they had to sign Monroe Brothers, and it turned out that they didn't want to make a new sign. So they
just kept it the same way, huh? Now, you've been lucky because you've had two very successful series. You did Make Room for Daddy as Charlie Halper, the club owner, and then you did this. Was there a big transition going from the city life to the country life?
Very much so.
In what way?
Well, I've always wanted to sound like Pat Buttram. And I can't.
No, you stick around long enough, too.
I can't.
I thought you wanted to sound like me.
I did. I did you a wonderful dialect.
That was Ava Gabor there at the end. So Sid Melton, he had a great sense of humor. He was a very funny guy. I don't think there's any debate that Sid Melton's most memorable role was as Alf the Carpenter in Green Acres. A nice Jewish boy from Brooklyn moves to Hooterville. Well, as long as we were talking about Green Acres, and Green Acres was one of the most revolutionary shows on television. It's much underrated today with its breaking of the fourth wall, with its non sequitur, with its characters. We're going to close with the theme from Green Acres. I want to thank my producer Sid Tepps, and here are Lisa and Oliver talking about the debate as to whether to move from Manhattan to Hooterville.
Green Acres is the place to be. Farm living is the life for me. Land spreading out so far and wide. Keep Manhattan, just give me that countryside.
New York is where I'd rather stay. I get allergic smelling hay. I just adore a penthouse view. Darling, I love you, but give me Park Avenue.
The chores.
The stores.
Fresh air.
Houseplant.
You are my wife.
Goodbye, city life.
Green Acres, we are there.